Kia ora tātou katoa, I'm Johnson Raela, and welcome back to the Pacific.
Maloni, I'm Alice Lolohea, and if you're a first-time viewer, warm Pacific greetings. Here's what we've got coming up on the show.
Ni Vanuatu are being forced from their homes, with calls growing for land reform.
More votes of no confidence in PNG, how they harm governance and what can be done about them.
And don't let go, because we've got a bit of Spawn Breezy for you.
First, though, he might have been obscured from view, but even in prison, George Speight is a name that hasn't left Fiji's conscience. In 2000, Mr. Speight led a coup to overthrow the government. 35 MPs were taken hostage, including then Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry. Our Fiji reporter Lede Movono explains the story behind George Speight and the political turmoil he instigated. And she met with Mr. Chaudhry as he contemplates Mr. Speight's release.
I've put that behind me. I hardly talk about it because we've got other important things ahead of us. I think I'm looking to the future. I have not forgotten the past. I've got it at the back of my mind. I have not forgotten it.
Former Fiji Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry has moved on from the events that launched him into the spotlight and the man who put him there. George Speight donning a celebratory shirt to receive his presidential pardon. A 67-year-old won't be spending the rest of his retirement years behind bars after all. But many haven't forgotten the events which landed him there. 24 years ago, May 19, 2000, Speight, along with other armed men, stormed Fiji's parliament, taking then Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry and 35 MPs hostage.
Right, I've executed the coup. I've toppled the government. I detained their members.
For 56 days, Suva was plunged into anarchy and political turmoil as riots and looting swept the capital.
George's perspective is this: Fiji for the Fijians.
Speight was both praised
We all love Speight.
and condemned.
We are looking at a very frightening scenario over here.
The coup was chalked up to ethnic tensions that boiled over when Chaudhry, the country's first elected Indo-Fijian Prime Minister, took office. Indo-Fijians, descended from labourers brought by the British, make up about 40% of Fiji's population. And this wasn't the first time ethnic tensions have boiled over. When an indigenous-led government lost the 1987 elections, current PM Sitiveni Rambuka, then a commander of the Fijian military forces, led a coup to overthrow the newly elected government. And later, another coup in 2006 saw Frank Bainimarama oust PM Laisenia Garcia and President Josefa Iloilo, after a political crisis sparked by 3 controversial bills deepened the ethnic divide. So back to Mr. Speight. With military arms, an elite unit behind him, and the support of nationalists, Speight says he was claiming back Fiji for the Fijians in the same fashion it was taken.
You know why my ancestor, Ratu Takambau, ceded himself to Britain? You know why? It's very simple. The gun.
In exchange for the release of hostages, Speight's group demanded that they have power in choosing the next government, that the constitution be changed to exclude Indo-Fijians from government, and that all parties involved in the coup receive amnesty. International pressure mounted as countries refused to acknowledge his caretaker government and imposed sanctions. But eventually, the key demands were met under the Monikau Accord. Keeping his word, Speight released the hostages. And it always seemed as if he would walk away a free man. But he was arrested in July. Later that year, the accord deemed invalid. Speight received the death penalty.
Sir, do you think the death penalty will be carried out against Mr. Speight?
You've got to be crazy. Of course it won't.
But with a guilty plea, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Speight's release comes at a time when the country is looking to reckon with its past. Fiji's parliament have passed a motion to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would help resolve racial differences. Some are calling for Speight to participate.
Those who suffer, the trauma has remained because we have not worked through the trauma that people went through.
Is there any work to ensure that people feel safe and are safe?
Doing that will mean that we feel that there is a threat. Just being normal about everything will remove that apprehension. I think they're very safe. They have nothing to worry about from Mr. Speight.
Fiji is headed up a different way now. We've come a long way since 2000. And I think you hear of reconciliation and good spirit, hanging in the air particularly through our most important institutions. But I want to show everybody, there is nothing to be concerned about. I want to show you that Fiji is safe.
It is for the government of the day to do something about it. Truth and reconciliation, how far will it go? How much can the victims of the coup expect from it? Will there be real justice? But I think we are taking a step towards it, and I hope that whatever comes out of it will be fair to all concerned.
And Lide is here with us now. She's been following the story all week. Pula Lide.
Bula vinaka toko.
What's the public mood at the moment regarding Speight's release?
Well, look, a lot of people are happy to see the man out. George Speight did represent a push for Indigenous leadership some 24-odd years ago. So there are a lot of people that are happy to see him out after being in jail for so long. However, there are also a lot of people who were at the receiving end of the violence that George Speight began when he took over the government in 2000. And for those people, a closure is necessary.
Overall, what do you think the fairly muted public response means about where Fiji is at politically and in terms of race relations?
Well, I think George Speight finally coming out after 21-odd years in jail represents a closing of a chapter of sorts for Fiji's quite turbulent political history. There are a lot of people who now feel satisfied and content that he has done his time, and there's a feeling of reconciliation in the air. There is a general consensus for the need to move forward.
And speaking of moving forward, there are calls for Speight to take part in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Chowdhury also echoes these calls. Does Speight have an obligation to do so now that he's a free man?
Well, George Speight received a full presidential pardon, so he is under no obligation to do anything or say anything to anyone. However, there are calls for him to speak in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, Ellis, it must be noted that the bill to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is currently making its rounds for feedback, and that bill is meant to be tabled before the end of the year. So until then, we don't really know what sort of legislative power and mandate this commission might have, and whether it might even have the legal ability to compel George Speight to appear before it.
And one of the champions of that bill is, of course, Prime Minister Rambuka. You spoke recently with him about Speight's release, and he mentioned he himself was a victim of Speight.
That's right. He says that he also wants George Speight to speak in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Now, for a country that has a very colorful coup culture like we do here in Fiji, the list of suspects over who might be those backers is very short. And so for the longest time, there have been allegations made that Rambuka might have had something to do with the fact that George Speight had the backing of the military's elite forces at the time. So Rambuka is hoping that George Speight will clear those allegations once and for all when he speaks to Rambuka's non-involvement in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
And staying with Prime Minister Rambuka, he also this week unveiled Fiji's first ever foreign policy white paper. It was written in a part by a former Australian diplomat, but it also stressed Fiji's non-alignment. Let's hear what the PM had to say.
We're friends to all and enemies to none, yes. And we have been non-aligned for a long time, although our policies and our assistance and aid and cooperation have been more towards the West.
Leather, what do you make of the PM's suggestion Fiji remains unaligned and of the white paper more broadly?
Look, this is Fiji's first ever foreign relations strategy, and so it provides some direction and some clues as to who Fiji will work with and the kind of values and principles that will guide the way in which they work with these partners. However, some things are clear. Rambuka's made it clear that the Pacific family, Pacific regionalism, and the Pacific Island Forum, Vuvale, is going to be the central part of how Fiji decides who it works with and what they work on together. As to the non-alignment positioning of Fiji, this is the first time that they've come out and put it in black and white that they're non-aligned. However, while he's announcing that, Ellis, he talks about leaning into their traditional partners, and we all know that what that means is the traditional partners are the democratic nations of the West. But one thing that is very clear is that Rambuka does not mince his words about the fact that Fiji's foreign relations environment is largely influenced and informed by the United States and China's geopolitical competition in the Pacific.
Lee, that's always insightful chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Malo.
In Vanuatu, mass evictions are uprooting entire communities and leaving many in search of permanent new homes.
People settling in the country's urban fringes are growing vulnerable to eviction as their agreements with local landowners fall apart.
Doug Dingwall with this story, with additional reporting by Keith Hingay, Philip Merika and Leah Lawambu.
Two beginning, first one, one small girl, install kindi. Number two, one small boy. Pe one where he had me water. Me lo try se sene mi blasta se water lo muy blockang. Pe mi blago kulung water lo wen, kulol paket o container plastic yang blasta karigam.
Life isn't easy in this settlement outside Port Vila. About 170 people have settled here in the past year.
Some look at light. Some look at solar. The some look at light.
And while they aren't connected to basic services, they're grateful to have a home. Ms. Sumatea was among hundreds of people evicted from a settlement near Corman Stadium last year.
We've been started Corman, I think 5 years. We've started away, fully pushing me out, we've away, Kotota, after we've out. We never look on something when same. We look only push small church house, whole building, where main house, the full town. Say for something, we go town, and we push them out everyone.
Evictions are common on the island of Afate, where space is tight in Port Vila, and many arrive in search of better opportunities.
The migration of people from rural to urban areas, which is taking place across the Pacific, has overwhelmingly involved people relocating to live on customary land.
On the outskirts of Port Vila, people make agreements with traditional landowners to live there, but don't register these with land authorities. Those arrangements are often long-standing but break when a chief or landowner dies, or when landowners make lease agreements with other parties for the same land.
Sometimes that population's been there for 10, 20, 30 years. There's a tapestry of arrangements across those areas, but none of them really grant people long-term permission in law to live in those areas.
Evictees from Corman settlements say when they first moved there, they made agreements with a member of the traditional landowning family and paid that person to live on the land. But there was already an existing lease, and the Supreme Court ordered the area be returned to the leaseholder.
From feeling blomy, me look feeling lo time mi haram ipitem time where one family and me dead. Miara mi no go from all abu all mi got two disabled with me. Mi got all abu blami we all man blown kata all travel all beginning all stop with me miara mi no.
Evictions disrupt people's incomes and children's educations, and there are fears other settlements will soon be uprooted.
There's still communities that are yet to be evicted. We really need to start developing pathways for counselling and pathways for guidance and support.
The government says it's working on solutions. Those include better access to affordable land and housing, plus warning about the risks of making agreements that aren't registered with land authorities. But the Lands Minister is calling for law reform.
The Ministry of Lands and agencies require reform and institutional capacities to be able to cope with the current trend of informal settlements and evictions.
Chief Nolau is happy they've broken the vicious cycle of evictions, but wants more protection to prevent it repeating. He says Indigenous landowners should have power to stop evictions happening on land they've leased out.
Meeting say government should revive low block ground. And it still affected me for that today. Me will stop with Pahadiat below, replace him back account where me will been cash out money to help me for that low time low eviction.
A vote of no confidence. It's a term we at the show and people across the Pacific hear a lot. In fact, many say far too many times, with Papua New Guinea just the latest country in the region to see a vote of no confidence against a sitting Prime Minister. It's the 6th this year. A vote of no confidence involves the opposition passing a threshold of support, triggering an MP poll on whether to keep the existing Prime Minister in government or elect an opposition alternative. PNG Prime Minister James Marape himself came to power through a vote of no confidence, showing just how much the practice pervades PNG's politics. Of the country's last 10 parliaments, 8 have had PMs ousted by a vote of no confidence, or resigned because of the threat of one. A provision preventing no confidence votes during a government's first 18 months protected Marape until February this year, but since then, he's had no peace.
Peace must prevail, unity must prevail. Let leaders invoke the process of a constitution in the vote of no confidence that is now on foot.
While Marape has so far managed to hold on to power, many are concerned it's a distraction from governing. Parliament passed 28 pieces of legislation last year, compared to just 3 this year to date. It's a time PNG can ill afford a lack of leadership, as cost of living and unemployment pressures are compounded by tribal violence and national disasters. But these votes aren't just a concern in PNG. Solomon Islands and Tonga have both seen no confidence motions in recent years, while in Vanuatu, Prime Ministers have been deposed so many times in the past 18 months, it's just held a referendum on measures to curb the practice. In PNG, moves from the government to allow a grace period once a PM has survived one motion haven't yet become law. Instead, Opposition leader Douglas Tomoriesa has promised to bring another when Parliament returns in November. Right, to unpack all this, we are joined by Scott Waide, a veteran reporter based in PNG. Hello, and thank you for joining the Pacific.
Thank you for having me, Johnson.
Now, firstly, why has PNG had so many votes of no confidence?
Well, it goes back to the multi-party system that we have. And it's supposed to work as a pressure valve for this democracy that we have. Unfortunately, every 18 months, there's a vote of no confidence being proposed or being pushed by whichever opposition parties that are there. And there have been measures put in place to try to remedy this problem by introducing legislation, constitutional changes. It's helped to some extent, but it hasn't actually resolved the problem. It'll take some time before the system and the politics matures to a point where the party numbers are limited to 2 4-party systems. The other reason for this votes of no confidence in a Melanesian society in particular, because you've seen instances of votes of no confidence in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, is the cultural background that everybody comes from. So the politics has to satisfy the tribe and the clan, and that plays out in national politics as well.
So how do these votes negatively impact PNG and the Pacific?
One of the most obvious is that there's so much uncertainty about who's going to lead government just before a vote of no confidence. So I'll give you an example. Just before the vote, this vote of no confidence that we had in Papua New Guinea, within the civil service, whenever there's a new government, there's also changes in the civil service heads. There's also changes in ministry. So there is this issue of continuity that it comes into question. Everybody just waits with bated breath, hoping for the best whenever there's a vote of no confidence motion.
So, Scott, what can be done to change things?
The legislation needs to be strengthened, and to a point where the political system matures. Now, we've had legislations put in place, but it'll take some time before the system becomes stronger and robust enough to withstand the instability that we continue to face.
On another note, PNG's Minister for National Planning, Anopala, criticised Australia's foreign aid program. Can you tell us a bit more about what the problem is and what needs to be done to make sure foreign aid is going to the right places?
We've always had this back and forth between Papua New Guinea and Australia in particular over aid. And the biggest concern for Papua New Guinea has been that a lot of the aid that comes into Papua New Guinea is captured by consultancy firms, management firms that are owned by Australian companies. And a lot of the money is taken up through the costs that these companies have, and very little trickles down to the actual places where the work is supposed to be done. And hence this development of this term called boomerang aid. There has to be this rethinking of how aid is delivered. It's a discussion that the UN is also having. You need locally led initiatives to be supported, and locally led organizations to take the lead in that aid.
Scott, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, Alice, let's shift gears a bit because summer is coming up, and what does that mean?
Sunshine?
Obviously. Think more like summer vibes.
Oh, like food, barbecues, drinks, music?
Music, yes. And my personal favourite, reggae music and music festivals, because I caught up with one of our faves, Spawn Breezy, who's actually coming back down under to perform a bunch of spring and summer gigs. So check this out.
Why people attract to certain songs is because the songwriter is able to say things that most feel but can't put in words. And I feel like that's something that I pride myself in having the ability to.
One thing about music, when you just wanna groove.
People will be thinking, what the hell are they doing in the gym? I see, the whole keeping healthy, moving.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Man, so at my heaviest, I was probably about like 370. I tried to justify being that heavy. We're Polynesian, this is who we are. But then when you look at the statistics, our people, man, we fight obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes. I felt like I wouldn't be fitting for this platform and impact for our people if I kept promoting that unhealthy life. So I got into it. I was fortunate to lose over 100 pounds, right? So where I'm at right now, don't judge me, guys. But this is daddy weight right here. Yeah, dad bod. There it is.
So last year we had Ian Dongi, American Idol winner, on the show.
That's right.
He talked about why it was important for him to sing songs that he grew up with, that he was familiar with, and obviously one of those songs that he performed is yours.
Yes, sir.
As long as you don't let go, don't let go.
Did you see the streaming numbers jump Did anything happen and did it shift the needle for you?
Yeah, it did. I remember coming home and then I'm opening to my social media and I'm seeing like over thousands of new followers. His loyalty to his character and to his people, man. He took us, you know, he carried my music. Like he's bringing a new demographic of multiple audiences to who we are. Like it's crazy. I go on stage, people of different ethnicities singing along to songs that I wouldn't think they'd gravitate towards, but because of Ian kicking the door down and saying, "This is my people, listen to them," and they, you know, just naturally gravitate towards it.
You've released some new music recently.
Yes, sir.
And get it, but you've been around for a very, very long time. With this latest album, what did it mean for you to bring out some new stuff?
I wanted to introduce who I am now to my audience, but I knew that I also have to give what they know me to be, you know? I feel like I want to keep our people intact with what the power of music holds. I see it differently, like this is spiritual to me, you know? So, yeah, it's too deep.
Is there a particular place you love to gig in? Particular country, particular?
It's always been New Zealand. You feel the unity between Samoans, Tongans, Maoris, Raoas, you know, like, yeah, but the love out there I feel is powerful.
Okay, since you got your music track, I want to quickly share something before we go.
Oh, look, we've run out of time. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Be quiet. 17-year-old Mele Prescott from Nuatautapu went viral with her angelic opera voice. It's opened up an audition opportunity in Australia. We'll leave you with the song.
And we'll see you next week.